"Oh, honey, that's a cute little outfit for the club, but not for this airplane." The gate agent's voice, sharp and saccharine, sliced through the terminal's dull roar. She looked Amara up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal designed to shrink her, to reduce her from a passenger to a problem. Amara, a 17-year-old honor student on her way to a National Youth Leadership Summit, stood frozen for a second. The agent, a woman with a name tag that read Brenda, and hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to be the source of her irritation, just smirked. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a challenge, a line drawn in the sand at Gate C-12 of Charlotte Douglas International Airport. And Brenda had no idea who she had just challenged. Amara Reed was not easily rattled. She'd navigated the complex social ecosystems of a competitive magnet, high school excelled in debate club, where she'd verbally disarmed opponents twice her age, and spent the last year meticulously planning for this trip. She was one of 200 students selected from across the country to attend the prestigious Young Leaders of America Summit in Los Angeles. It was the culmination of everything she'd worked for. Her flight, a no-frills, budget-friendly ride on Ascend Air, was just the first step. She had dressed for comfort and practicality, knowing a 5-hour flight awaited her. She wore a pair of high-quality opaque black athletic leggings, a matching black long-sleeved top that covered her completely, and a stylish, loose-fitting grey zip-up hoodie over it. On her feet were a clean pair of Nike sneakers. It was the unofficial uniform of her generation, for travel comfortable, modest, and utterly unremarkable. Or so she thought. "I'm sorry," Amara asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the sudden cold fury coiling in her stomach. "Is there a problem with my attire? Brenda?" The gate agent tapped a long, blood-red fingernail on the counter. "There is, sweetie. Ascend Air is a family airline. We have a dress code. No pajamas, no swimwear, and nothing revealing." She said the last word with a pointed glance at Amara's legs, as if the leggings were painted on. Amara blinked. "These are athletic leggings. They're opaque, and I'm wearing a long top and a jacket. Nothing is revealing." "That's a matter of opinion, isn't it?" Brenda's smile was a thin, unpleasant line. Behind her, a younger agent, a nervous-looking man named Leo, avoided eye contact, shuffling a stack of papers. "Your bottoms are form-fitting. It could be seen as inappropriate. We don't want to make other passengers uncomfortable." The line behind Amara was growing a tapestry of impatient sighs and shuffling feet. A middle-aged man in a business suit audibly grumbled, "For God's sake, just let the girl on the plane!" Brenda's eyes flashed toward him before returning to Amara. The public challenge only solidified her resolve. She was the queen of this small, carpeted kingdom, and she would not be usurped. "Ma'am, I've made my decision. Your attire is not compliant with our policy. You will not be boarding this flight looking like that." Amara took a deep, centering breath, just as her mother had taught her. Dr. Evelyn Reed had a mantra for situations like this. Stay calm. State facts. Do not surrender your power. Could you please provide me with a printed copy of this dress code? Policy, Amara asked her, tone impeccably polite. The one I agreed to when I purchased my ticket stated no offensive language or images and standard rules about footwear. It mentioned nothing about the fit of one's pants. Brenda's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. She hadn't expected the girl to be so articulate, so composed. She waved a dismissive hand. It's all in the carriage of Contract Section 12, subparagraph B. The airline reserves the right to refuse transport to any person whose attire may cause a disturbance or offense to fellow passengers, and who determines the offense you, Amara, pressed. Because I see at least 5 other women in this line wearing leggings. One of them is right behind me. She gestured discreetly with her head. A blonde woman in her 30s, wearing bright pink yoga pants and a tank top, looked up, suddenly aware she was part of the conversation. Brenda's face tightened. The subtle racism that underpinned her decision was now at risk of being exposed. It wasn't just the leggings. It was the whole package, the confident young black woman with her expensive-looking luggage and her air of belonging. Brenda's world was a small one, and she liked to keep people in their designated boxes. Amara didn't fit. Her top is longer. Brenda snapped a weak and obvious lie. The woman's tank top barely reached her waist. That's demonstrably false, Amara said, her voice dropping, becoming colder. My hoodie goes past my hips. I am more covered than she is. The final boarding call for Flight 714 to Los Angeles echoed through the terminal. The sound was a death knell for Amara's chances. This discussion is over, Brenda declared, her voice rising in triumph. She turned to the gate's podium microphone. Final boarding for Ascend Air Flight 714. She looked back at Amara, her eyes glittering with petty victory. You can try to rebook for a later flight if you find something more appropriate to wear. Maybe the airport gift shop has a nice long skirt. Humiliation, hot and sharp, finally pricked through Amara's composure. Her hands holding her boarding pass and ID trembled slightly. She had done everything right. She had followed every rule. And still here she was, being publicly shamed and denied her rightful place on the plane over a manufactured discriminatory complaint. The faces in the line blurred a mixture of pity, annoyance, and indifference. The door to the jet bridge began to close. Her flight and her summit were leaving without her. Defeated Amara stepped away from the counter. She watched as the last few passengers, including the woman in the pink yoga pants, scanned their tickets and walked through the gate. The heavy door clicked shut with an air of finality. Brenda gave a satisfied little sigh, turning to her paperwork as if Amara had ceased to exist. For her, the problem was solved. The world was back in its proper order. Amara took out her phone. Her hands were still shaking, but her purpose was clear. She scrolled to her favorites and pressed the first name. Her mother. It rang once, twice. "Hi, sweetie," a warm, professional voice answered. About to take off, Amara swallowed the lump in her throat. "No, Mom," she said, her voice cracking just a little. "They won't let me on the plane." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound it felt like the world was holding its breath. Then Dr. Evelyn Reed's voice came back, devoid of its earlier warmth, replaced by something as cold and hard as steel. "Where are you, Amara? Tell me the exact gate number." The 20 minutes after the plane departed were a masterclass in corporate indifference. Amara, now standing forlornly near the charging stations, had become invisible. The hustle and bustle for the next flight began to populate the area around Gate C-12, erasing any evidence of the previous drama. Brenda Jenkins operated with brisk, unbothered efficiency, her earlier confrontation seemingly forgotten. Amara's call with her mother had been short and precise. After getting the gate number and the airline's name, Evelyn had said only 5 words. "Stay there. I'm on my way." She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. Amara knew that tone. It was the voice her mother used when a multi-billion-dollar federal program had an accounting discrepancy, or when a senior official was caught wasting taxpayer money. It was a voice that promised methodical, unshakable consequences. Feeling a small measure of hope, Amara decided to try one more time to reason with the system. She approached the counter again, waiting for a lull between passengers. This time she addressed the younger agent, Leo, whose name she'd clocked earlier. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I need to speak with the supervisor." Leo jumped, startled. "Oh, sure. He glanced nervously at Brenda, who was busy typing. He scurried to a back office door and returned a moment later with a man in a slightly ill-fitting suit. He was Robert Miller, the station's duty manager. He had thinning hair, a perpetually worried expression, and the weary air of a man who had spent his career de-escalating conflicts he'd rather ignore. "Yes, can I help you?" Robert asked, his eyes already flicking toward the clock on the wall. Amara calmly and concisely recounted the entire incident. She explained her destination, detailed her outfit piece by piece, and contrasted Brenda's judgment of her with the attire of other passengers who were allowed to board. "I was denied boarding, based on what I believe to be a subjective and discriminatory application of a vague policy," she concluded. "I have missed my flight and will now miss the opening reception of a national conference I worked very hard to attend. I would like to know what Ascendair intends to do about this." Robert listened with a pained expression, nodding periodically. When she finished, he turned to Brenda. "Brenda, what's the story here?" Brenda didn't even bother to stand. Just like I told her, Robert. Her pants were too tight. Looked like she was wearing spray paint. It violates the dress code. End of story. "It's not the end of story," Amara interjected. "Your policy is being applied inconsistently. That's a potential violation of federal regulations regarding passenger rights." Robert held up a hand. "Now let's not get carried away with regulations. Brenda has been with us for 12 years. She knows the policies. She's an excellent agent." He gave Brenda a placating smile, which she returned with a smug little nod. The message was clear. The corporate family protected its own. "So you're siding with her?" Amara asked, incredulous. "Without even investigating my claim, without looking at the security footage to see the other passengers she let on?" Ma'am, Robert said, his tone shifting from placating to condescending. "I'm sure this is very disappointing for you. Our next flight to Los Angeles with available seats is tomorrow afternoon. We can rebook you on that flight, but you would be responsible for the fare difference, as you failed to comply with our boarding requirements." The audacity was breathtaking. They were going to charge her for their discrimination. "Unacceptable," Amara said, her voice hard. "You're going to book me on the next available flight to LA on any airline at your expense, and you are going to provide compensation for the opportunity I have lost today." Robert actually chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "That's not going to happen. I'm sorry you feel that way, but my agent made a judgment call, and I support her. Now, if there's nothing else..." He turned ready to dismiss her and returned to his office. It was at that moment that a woman in a sharp navy blue pantsuit walked into the gate area. She moved with a quiet, purposeful grace that parted the crowds around her. She was in her late 40s, with her hair in a neat, professional chignon. She carried a simple leather portfolio, not a purse. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the area before landing on Amara. She walked straight to her daughter, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "Amara, are you all right?" she asked, her voice low and calm, yet it carried an unmistakable weight of authority. "I'm fine, Mum," Amara said, relief washing over her. "Just frustrated." Evelyn Reed squeezed her arm gently before turning her gaze to Robert Miller and Brenda Jenkins. Brenda, seeing the well-dressed woman, immediately pasted on her customer service smile. "Good morning, ma'am. Can I help you?" she chirped. "Yes, I believe you can," Evelyn said, her voice smooth as silk. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Reed. This is my daughter Amara." She gestured to the girl beside her. "I'd like to understand precisely why she was denied boarding on Flight 714. Robert stepped forward, re-engaging his manager persona. "Of course, Dr. Reed. I'm Robert Miller, the duty manager. As I was just explaining to your daughter, our gate agent, Brenda, determined that her attire was not in compliance with our family-friendly dress code. While we regret the inconvenience—" Evelyn held up a hand, a simple gesture that immediately silenced him. "Mr. Miller, I am not interested in your regrets. I am interested in facts. Brenda, you were the agent who made this call." Brenda, emboldened by Robert's support, nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Her leggings were inappropriate. Inappropriate according to what specific written standard?" Evelyn asked, her eyes unblinking. "According to our carriage of contract, which gives us the right—" Brenda began parroting the line she had used on Amara. Evelyn cut her off again, this time with more force. "I am familiar with the standard language in contracts of carriage. They are intentionally broad to provide airlines with discretion. However, that discretion is not a license to discriminate. Federal law, specifically, Title 49 of the U.S. Code prohibits air carriers from subjecting a person to unreasonable discrimination. Now, my daughter has alleged that you applied this discretionary rule to her, a young black woman, while allowing other passengers, specifically white women, in similar or more revealing attire to board. Is this correct?" Robert and Brenda exchanged a flicker of a panicked glance. This was not the typical angry parent. The woman's language was precise, legalistic. "Now hold on," Robert said, puffing out his chest. "We don't discriminate here. This has nothing to do with race." "Doesn't it?" Evelyn's voice was dangerously quiet. "Then it must be a simple training issue, a failure to ensure uniform application of company policy across all demographics. I'm sure your corporate headquarters and your legal department would be very interested to learn about such a procedural failure at one of their busiest hubs." Brenda Ever, the petty tyrant, couldn't help herself. "Look, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but you can't come in here and threaten us. I made a call. My manager backed the call. It's over. Your daughter missed her flight. Buy her a new ticket and a new pair of pants." It was the single most career-ending sentence Brenda Jenkins would ever utter. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Evelyn Reed's lips. It was not a smile of amusement. It was a smile of anticipation. "Who I think I am," she repeated softly. "That's an excellent question." She reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a slim, dark blue case. She flipped it open. Inside, nestled against the leather, was a gold badge and a credential card. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed," she said, her voice now resonating with the full, unadulterated power of her office. "I am the Inspector General for the United States Department of Transportation. The Federal Aviation Administration is under my purview. And this airline, Mr. Miller, along with every single employee in this airport, falls directly under the oversight jurisdiction of my office." She held the credentials out for them to see. "And you are right. This isn't just a threat. It's a promise. We are no longer discussing a missed flight. We are now at the start of a formal OIG investigation into the operational and training protocols of Ascendair, beginning with Gate C-12 at Charlotte Douglas International. The change in the atmosphere around Gate C-12 was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if Evelyn Reed's words had altered the very laws of physics in their small corner of the terminal. The air, once thick with bureaucratic arrogance, was now thin with sheer, unadulterated terror. Brenda Jenkins's face, which had been a mask of smug defiance, crumbled. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, mottled canvas of fear. Her jaw went slack, and her eyes wide and disbelieving were fixed on the golden badge in Evelyn's hand. The badge seemed to catch the fluorescent lights of the terminal and magnify them a star of federal authority that burned away all her petty power. Robert Miller reacted even more dramatically. He physically recoiled, taking a half-step back, as if Evelyn had produced a weapon. A sheen of sweat popped out on his forehead. His fumbling attempt to project authority evaporated replaced by the frantic energy of a man who suddenly realized he was standing on a trap door and had just heard the latch spring. Aye, Inspector General. He stammered his voice, a pathetic squeak. The title hung in the air, alien and terrifying. It wasn't a customer service complaint. It wasn't a lawsuit he could pass off to the legal department. It was the government. It was the highest level of internal oversight, the entity that airlines spent millions in compliance costs to avoid ever having to deal with directly. Evelyn snapped the credential case shut with a sharp, definitive click. The sound made both Brenda and Robert flinch. "Yes, Mr. Miller, Inspector General," she said, her tone utterly devoid of emotion. She was no longer a mother. She was an investigator, commencing her work. "Now let's reset this conversation, shall we? I find that clarity is essential at the beginning of an official inquiry." She turned her full attention to Brenda, whose entire body had begun to tremble. "Ms. Jenkins, I will need your full name, your employee identification number, and the name of your direct union representative if you have one. You will not be operating this or any other gate for the remainder of your shift. In fact, you will not be performing any customer-facing duties until my office has concluded its preliminary review." I was just following the rules," Brenda whispered, her voice cracking. "Whose rules?" Miss Jenkins Evelyn's question was a scalpel. "The written rules of the airline, which, as my daughter pointed out, you failed to produce and applied with stunning inconsistency, or your own personal rules which appear to have a rather specific demographic target. My office will be very interested in discovering which it is." Evelyn then turned back to Robert Miller. "Mr. Miller, you identified yourself as the duty manager. You stated that you supported your agent's judgment call. This means you are now a principal subject in this inquiry. You have formally endorsed a discriminatory act by a subordinate, making it a management-level failure. I will require your full name and employee ID as well." She looked past him into the small office he had emerged from. "I will need you to immediately secure all records pertaining to today's flight, 7:14 to Los Angeles. That includes the full passenger manifest, all gate agent logs, and any and all incident reports filed by Ms. Jenkins in the last, let's say, 90 days. I also want you to preserve all CCTV footage from this gate area, the surrounding corridors, and the check-in counters, starting from 3 hours before the flight's scheduled departure until this present moment. Do you understand that any attempt to alter, delete, or conceal these records constitutes obstruction of a federal investigation, a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison?" Robert nodded numbly, his mind clearly struggling to process the cataclysmic turn his morning had taken. 20 minutes ago, he was a mid-level manager dealing with a grumpy teenager. Now he was facing prison time. Good, Evelyn said. She wasn't finished. She looked around the gate area. "Leo." She called out her memory for names, proving as sharp as her legal acumen. The younger agent, who had been trying to merge with the wallpaper, went rigid. "Yes, ma'am. You were present for the entire initial interaction, were you not?" "Yes, ma'am. You will be required to provide a formal statement as a witness. For now, find another agent to cover this gate. Mr. Miller and Ms. Jenkins are indisposed." Leo practically sprinted away, grateful to be escaping the blast radius. Amara stood beside her mother, watching the scene unfold with a sense of detached awe. The humiliation she had felt was being replaced by a profound understanding of the power her mother wielded. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, systematic, and utterly devastating. It was the power of competence, of knowing the rules of the system so intimately that you could dismantle it piece by piece from the inside. Evelyn finally turned back to her daughter, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. I need to make some calls, Amara. Why don't you go get yourself a coffee and a pastry? Get something for me, too. Black coffee. She handed Amara her credit card. It was a simple motherly act that stood in stark contrast to the institutional demolition she had just initiated. It was also a way to get Amara out of the immediate vicinity while she escalated things further. As Amara walked away, she saw her mother pull out her phone. She didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was happening. Her mother wasn't calling Ascendair's customer service line. She was calling her own office to officially open a case file. She was likely calling the FAA's regional director to inform them of a pending OIG action at one of their supervised airports. The gears of a vast and powerful bureaucracy were grinding into motion, all because one gate agent on a power trip decided to pick on the wrong teenager. Brenda Jenkins was no longer smirking. She was slumped against the counter, her face in her hands, weeping quietly. Robert Miller was on his own phone, his voice a frantic, high-pitched whisper, as he presumably spoke to someone far, far up the corporate food chain. But Amara knew it was too late. The call Robert should have made was to his own legal counsel. The problem was no longer contained to Gate C-12. It was about to land on the desk of Ascendair's CEO. By the time Amara returned with the coffees, the scene at Gate C-12 had transformed again. The gate was now staffed by two new grim-faced agents who looked as if they'd been told they were handling a biohazard. Robert Miller was pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear, his face slick with sweat. Brenda Jenkins was gone, presumably escorted to a back room to await her fate. Dr. Evelyn Reed stood calmly by the window, overlooking the tarmac, her portfolio tucked under her arm. She took the black coffee from Amara with a grateful nod. "Things are in motion," she said quietly, her voice, once again, that of a mother talking to her daughter. The regional VP of operations for Ascendair is on his way down from the executive offices. His name is David Harrison. "Are they in trouble?" Amara asked, stating the obvious. Evelyn took a sip of her coffee. "Let's just say Mr. Harrison is having a very bad day. And it's about to get worse." Less than 10 minutes later, David Harrison arrived. He was the quintessential corporate executive, expensive suit, perfect hair and a smile that was broad but didn't reach his eyes. He exuded an aura of practiced calm, the kind men develop when their job is to put out fires, both literal and metaphorical. He made a beeline for Evelyn, his hand outstretched. "Dr. Reed." He boomed his voice a little too loud. "David Harrison, Regional VP for Ascendair. I cannot begin to tell you how sorry I am for this entire situation. It's a complete misunderstanding, a terrible failure on our part, and I am here to personally rectify it." Evelyn did not take his outstretched hand. She simply looked at him. "Mr. Harrison, my daughter was subjected to public humiliation and discriminatory treatment by your staff. Your duty manager then endorsed that discrimination and attempted to charge her for the privilege of being rebooked. This is far beyond a misunderstanding. This is a systemic failure. The time for apologies is over. We are now in the fact-finding phase." Harrison's smile tightened. This was not going to be an easy fix. Of course, whatever you need. My team is securing the records you requested as we speak. The employees involved, Miss Jenkins and Mr. Miller, have been suspended pending a full internal investigation. There will be no internal investigation, Mr. Harrison. Evelyn corrected him coolly. My office, the Office of the Inspector General, will be conducting the investigation. Your company will comply. You will provide us with unfettered access to all personnel records and facilities we deem necessary. Is that understood? Yes, absolutely, Harrison said quickly. He was clearly out of his depth. He was used to dealing with angry customers, not federal investigators with subpoena power. He tried a different tack, turning his practiced charm on Amara. And Amara, on behalf of the entire airline, I am so deeply sorry. This is not what Ascend Air stands for. We've already booked you a seat in first class on the next flight to Los Angeles, which departs in 45 minutes from a gate just down the hall. We've also refunded your original ticket in full, and we'd like to offer you a book of first-class travel vouchers for you and your family as a more tangible apology for what you've been through. It was a generous offer designed to placate and end the immediate crisis. A week ago, Amara might have been thrilled, but watching her mother work had changed her perspective. This wasn't about a free flight anymore. Before Amara could respond, Evelyn stepped in. "We appreciate the gesture, Mr. Harrison. My daughter will accept the seat on the next flight, as she has a conference to attend. We will, however, be declining the vouchers for now." Harrison looked confused. Declining, but why? Because accepting them could be construed as a settlement, Evelyn stated plainly. And we have not yet determined the full scope of the damages. This incident is not an isolated data point, Mr. Harrison. It's a symptom, and I intend to find the disease. The color drained from Harrison's face. He finally understood. This wasn't going away. This wasn't something he could solve with first-class tickets and corporate platitudes. My preliminary inquiry. Evelyn continued, her voice methodical. Will focus on Ascend Air's training programs for its frontline staff, specifically regarding the application of discretionary policies. We will be analyzing hiring practices, complaint records, and previous disciplinary actions system-wide. I'll be requesting data on every passenger denied boarding for dress code violations for the past 2 years, cross-referenced by demographic information. Each word was a hammer blow to Harrison's composure. A system-wide OIG audit was a corporate nightmare. It meant months, possibly years of legal fees, operational disruptions, and a cloud of federal scrutiny that could scare away investors and customers. It could lead to multi-million-dollar fines, federally mandated changes to their business practices, and a public relations disaster of epic proportions. Furthermore, Evelyn added, delivering the final blow, a young woman at the gate, who I believe is a law student, recorded a significant portion of the initial confrontation on her phone. My daughter has her contact information. That footage is now potential evidence. I'm sure you understand the implications of a video showing your agent racially profiling a teenager going viral while your company is under federal investigation for discriminatory practices. Harrison looked like he was going to be physically ill. The specter of the video combined with the OIG investigation was a doomsday scenario. He was no longer trying to manage a complaint. He was trying to save his company from a full-blown catastrophe. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice now a strained plea. "What can we do to make this right?" Evelyn looked at him, her expression unyielding. "You can start, Mr. Harrison, by ensuring my daughter gets on her flight. Then you can go back to your office and instruct your entire company from the board of directors down to fully and transparently cooperate with my investigation. And you can begin to seriously contemplate how a corporate culture evolves to the point where an employee feels empowered to treat a child the way yours treated my daughter today." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "My team will be in touch tomorrow morning to schedule the initial document production. I suggest you have your general counsel on standby." With that, she turned to Amara. "Come on, sweetie. Let's get you to your new gate." As they walked away, leaving David Harrison standing shell-shocked in the middle of the terminal, Amara felt a sense of awe that eclipsed everything else. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about correction. Her mother wasn't just tearing something down, she was preparing to build something better in its place. The personal injustice Amara had suffered was being transformed into a catalyst for systemic change. The reckoning for Ascendair for Brenda Jenkins and for Robert Miller was only just beginning. It wouldn't be loud and explosive. It would be quiet, methodical, and absolute. The first-class cabin was a world away from the chaotic gate area. The seats were wide leather armchairs, the air was calm, and a flight attendant had already offered Amara a pre-departure orange juice in a real glass. Evelyn had walked her all the way to the door of the aircraft, ensuring a seamless and respectful handover to the new cabin crew who had clearly been briefed on the situation and treated Amara with solicitous courtesy. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Amara looked out the window and saw her mother standing in the terminal, watching the aircraft depart. Even from a distance, she projected an aura of unshakable resolve. Amara settled back into her seat, the anger and humiliation finally giving way to a sense of profound, complicated peace. The summit was still ahead of her, but the most important lesson of the day had already been learned. Back in the terminal, Evelyn Reed's work was not finished. She found a quiet seat with a view of the airfield and made 2 more phone calls. The first was to the head of her investigative division, setting the wheels of the official inquiry in motion. The second was to a contact at a major national newspaper, a seasoned investigative journalist she had worked with before on stories exposing government waste. She gave him a carefully worded, off-the-record background briefing. She didn't give him the whole story, just the bare-bones verifiable facts: a passenger denied boarding under questionable circumstances, a potential pattern of discrimination, and the fact that the DOT's Office of the Inspector General was looking into it. She knew that the mere whisper of an OIG investigation would be enough for a good reporter to start digging. The public pressure would be a crucial lever. The consequences for the individuals involved unfolded with brutal efficiency over the next few weeks. Brenda Jenkins was fired within 48 hours. The official reason was gross violation of company policy and customer treatment standards. But it was more than that. With an active OIG investigation, she was a liability the airline couldn't afford. Her union representation was a formality. Faced with the evidence, including the passenger's video which soon surfaced, they quietly negotiated a severance that included a non-disclosure agreement, and Brenda Jenkins vanished from the airline industry. She would never work in a customer-facing role at any airport for any airline ever again. Her petty tyranny at Gate C12 had cost her her entire career. Robert Miller, the duty manager, was also terminated. His failure was deemed even more severe. He had been in a position of authority and not only failed to correct his subordinate's mistake, but actively endorsed it. He had escalated a customer service issue into a federal case. In the cold, calculating world of corporate liability, he was the greater fool. His attempts to find another management position in the industry were met with polite but firm rejections. The story, once it broke, made him infamous in aviation circles. No one wanted to hire the manager who invited a full-scale OIG audit onto his company. He ended up managing a rental car outlet in a suburban strip mall, a ghost of his former self-important self. The reckoning for Ascendair was far more extensive and costly. As Dr. Reed had predicted, the story broke in the national news. The initial article citing anonymous sources about a DOT OIG probe into Ascendair's boarding practices was followed by the viral release of the video from the law student. The footage was damning. It showed a calm, well-spoken Amara being stonewalled and humiliated by a smirking Brenda. The public outcry was immense. Fly with Dignity trended for days. Ascendair's stock price took a significant hit. The investigation led by Dr. Reed's office was as thorough as it was merciless. They found what she suspected: a pattern. Dozens of similar dress code incidents over the past 2 years showed a clear and statistically significant bias against women of color. The airline's training was vague, its oversight non-existent. faced with a mountain of evidence and the threat of crippling fines and sanctions, Ascend Air chose to cooperate fully. David Harrison was reassigned to a remote office in a role with no operational authority, a corporate exile. The CEO issued a public apology on national television, but the most significant consequence was the consent decree the airline was forced to sign with the Department of Transportation. It was a legally binding agreement that mandated a complete overhaul of their customer service training, overseen by a federally appointed monitor. They were required to establish a clear, unambiguous dress code policy with visual examples and eliminate all subjective language. They had to implement a new complaint system that was tracked by the FAA and pay a multi-million-dollar fine that would be used to fund consumer protection programs. Months later, Amara was back home from college for the holidays. She was telling her mother about her political science class when a news alert popped up on her phone. It was an article detailing the final terms of the consent decree with Ascend Air. It mentioned the sweeping changes, the fine, and the new training programs designed to prevent discrimination. "Look," Mom Amara said, showing her the phone. "You did that." Evelyn read the article, a quiet satisfaction in her eyes. "No, sweetie," she said, looking at her daughter with immense pride. "We did that. You were brave and composed in the face of ugliness. You stood your ground. I just aimed the institutional response in the right direction. Never forget that the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be diminished." The incident at Gate C-12 had started with an act of petty malice, an attempt to make a young woman feel small. But it had ended in a quiet, systemic revolution. It wasn't a loud, dramatic explosion of comeuppance. It was something more lasting, more powerful. It was the careful, deliberate, and permanent correction of an injustice, a clear and undeniable message that the consequences for such actions would not be fleeting, but etched into the very policies and procedures of the powerful, ensuring that what happened to Amara Reed would be far less likely to ever happen again. 2 years after the incident at Gate C-12, the world had changed both on a grand scale and in the intimate confines of individual lives. The consent decree forced upon Ascend Air by Dr. Reed's office had become a landmark in transport regulation, informally dubbed the Reed Decree within the industry. It had a chilling effect on other airlines, prompting preemptive reviews of their own vague and discretionary policies. The ripples of that day had spread far beyond a single gate, a single airline, a single family. They had become waves reshaping the shoreline of corporate accountability. For Amara Reed, now a 19-year-old sophomore at Georgetown University, the incident was no longer a raw wound of humiliation. It had been forged into a compass. The memory was not a source of anger, but of clarity. It had irrevocably shaped her path, solidifying a nascent interest in law into a concrete, driving ambition. She was a political science major with a minor in African American studies, and her sights were set firmly on a JD in civil rights law. She stood now in a small, stuffy conference room on campus, not as a victim, but as an advocate. Across from her sat a nervous freshman named Ben, who was on the verge of losing his academic scholarship over a bureaucratic tangle involving a misfiled financial aid form. Beside him, a university administrator, a man with the weary patience of a career paper pusher, looked at his computer screen with a distinct lack of urgency. "As you can see," Mr. Davies Amara said, her voice calm and measured, echoing the tone her mother had used 2 years prior. "Ben's file shows the FAFSA was submitted on May the 1st. The university's own portal shows receipt on May the 2nd. The deadline was May 5th. The form he was sent stating he missed the deadline was generated by an automated system on May 3rd, a full 2 days before the deadline had actually passed. This isn't a case of a missed deadline. It's a case of a flawed automated notification system creating a false negative. She slid a printed timeline she had prepared across the table. It was clear, concise, and irrefutable. Mr. Davies stared at the paper, then back at his screen. He was used to dealing with flustered students and angry parents. He was not used to dealing with another student who came armed with a documented chronological breakdown of the university's own procedural failure. Well, this is highly organized. He mumbled a grudging respect in his tone. It's just the facts. Amara replied, a small smile touching her lips. And the facts show that Ben is fully compliant. The scholarship should be reinstated immediately to ensure he can register for his spring semester classes. An hour later, Amara and a visibly relieved Ben walked out into the crisp autumn air of the campus. "I can't thank you enough, Amara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was panicking. They weren't listening to me." "They don't listen to panic," Amara said, adjusting the strap of her backpack. "They listen to procedure. You just have to learn their language and use it better than they do." It was the single greatest lesson her mother had ever taught her, not with words, but with action. That evening she called her mum, who was in Seattle for a conference. "Guess what the topic of my comparative law seminar was today?" Evelyn asked, her voice warm through the phone. "I have no idea." "The Ascend Air Decree. We have visiting scholars from Germany studying it as a model for consumer protection enforcement within the EU. They're calling it a new standard in corporate oversight. You're in textbooks, sweetie." Amara laughed. "That's surreal. Don't tell my professors they'll never let me get away with handing in a late paper." "You never hand in late papers," Evelyn countered wryly. "How was your day? Did you help that young man with his scholarship issue?" Amara recounted the meeting, the administrator's surprise, the successful outcome. "It felt good, Mum. It felt right, like I was putting a piece of the world back into the right shape. That's all the job ever is," Evelyn said softly. "Whether it's a multi-billion-dollar airline or a single student's scholarship, it's just putting things right. I'm so proud of the woman you're becoming." As Amara hung up, she felt a profound sense of peace. The trajectory of her life was clear, pointed toward a future of advocacy, of using the system's own weight to bend it toward justice. Her future was an expanding universe of possibility. For Brenda Jenkins, the universe had shrunk to the size of a single windowless room. Her life was a study in beige, the beige walls of her small apartment, the beige uniform of her job, the beige flavor of her days. After being fired from Ascend Air, she had discovered she was not just unemployed, but toxic. The incident, thanks to the viral video and subsequent news coverage, had become a digital ghost that haunted her every application. No one wanted to hire the face of petty racist bureaucracy. After 6 months of burning through her severance and accruing debt, she had finally found a job through a temp agency that didn't ask too many questions. She worked the night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. as a stocker at a massive 24-hour wholesale club on the outskirts of Charlotte. The work was anonymous and physically demanding. She unpacked pallets of toilet paper, hoisted crates of canned goods, and arranged displays of discounted electronics under the harsh, humming fluorescent lights. She rarely spoke to her co-workers. They were a collection of ghosts, like her people working at the edges of the day, for reasons they didn't share. The shame of her downfall had curdled into a hard, bitter resentment. In the quiet, lonely hours of the night, her thoughts would circle back to that day. In her mind, she was the victim. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was just doing her job enforcing a rule. It was that girl, so smug and entitled, and her powerful mother who had ruined her life. It was a vendetta. They had set out to destroy her, and they had succeeded. She never once considered that she had handed them the hammer and chisel herself. One night around 3 a.m. she was stocking the travel aisle. Luggage, neck pillows, travel-size toiletries. A young couple, probably on their way to an early flight, were the only customers in the aisle. "We should get one of these," the woman said, holding up a digital luggage scale. "After what happened to my cousin last year, I'm not taking any chances." "What happened?" the man asked. "Oh, she was flying on a send, back before they got slapped down by the government. They tried to tell her she couldn't get on the plane because her carry-on was too big, even though it fit in the sizer. It was just some power-tripping agent. But ever since that big case with the teenage girl they kicked off for her yoga pants, they're all super polite. That Inspector General lady really cleaned house." Brenda froze her hand, hovering over a box of TSA-approved locks. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They were talking about her. They were talking about her life, her ruin as a piece of casual late-night chatter. The woman called her some power-tripping agent. The phrase was a dagger, sharp and precise, because deep down in a place she never looked, Brenda knew it was true. She ducked her head, her face burning with a shame so hot it felt like a fever. She turned and fled the aisle, hiding in the cavernous cold dairy section until the couple was gone. Leaning against the glass door of the milk cooler, the cold seeping through her thin uniform, she felt the full weight of her new reality. Her story didn't belong to her anymore. It was a public anecdote, a cautionary tale told by strangers. She hadn't just lost her job. She had lost her name, her history replaced by a caricature of a villain in a story that would be told for years to come. A few weeks later, her manager called her into the office. He held up a printout from a tablet. It was an article from a Georgetown University student newspaper website, headlined, "Sophomore Activist Amara Reed Leads Initiative for Student-Run Legal Aid Clinic." There was a picture of Amara, poised and smiling, standing on the steps of a campus building. "Is this the girl?" the manager asked, his voice flat. He had recognized Brenda's face from the old news clip someone had sent him. Brenda stared at the picture. Amara looked so much older, so confident. She was thriving. She was building things. While Brenda was stocking shelves in the dead of night, the girl she had tried to diminish was becoming a force in her own right. Her name now associated with positive change and advocacy. The contrast was a physical blow. "Yeah," Brenda whispered, her voice raspy. "That's her." The manager sighed. "Look, Brenda, I don't care about your past. You do your job here. But the night manager says you've been volatile, snapping at people. You disappeared from your post for an hour the other week. We can't have that. This is your last warning." Brenda walked out of the office, the manager's words barely registering. All she could see was Amara's smiling face. The girl's trajectory was an arrow, flying straight and true into a bright future. Brenda's was a stone dropped from a great height, still falling with no bottom in sight. The reckoning hadn't been a single event. It was this. It was the daily grinding reality of her shrunken world, the constant echoing reminder of the moment she chose to exercise her small power with cruelty, and in doing so lost everything. Her punishment wasn't prison. It was a life sentence of obscurity and regret. That single sarcastic sentence from a gate agent set off a chain reaction that nobody, least of all her, could have anticipated. It was a story of a mother's love, not expressed through yelling or tears, but through the calm, methodical application of immense professional power. Dr. Evelyn Reed didn't just get her daughter on a new flight. She leveraged an act of personal injustice to force an entire corporation to confront its systemic failings. She proved that the most effective response to prejudice isn't always a loud confrontation, but a quiet, unyielding pursuit of accountability that reshapes the very rules of the game. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the person you underestimate is the one holding all the cards. If you believe that competence is a superpower, and that justice should be systematic, not just symbolic, then please give this video a like. Share this story with someone who needs to see how true power works. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories where the scales of justice are balanced in the most satisfying ways.